Sarah is useless in the kitchen anyway. She doesn't even cook properly at home, he said. And suddenly, everyone's cold gaze turned towards me. Emboldened, Jake began to speak even louder. Have you ever eaten food I made? Or are all your meals at your lover's house? I confessed Jake's infidelity loudly. This is no joke. Here is the proof, I said, pointing to the documents in the hands of my in-laws. I am Sarah, 35 years old. I have always been somewhat intimidated by men's assertiveness, to the point of feeling fear. Because of this, I rarely dated and had few interactions with men. As I approached around 40 years old, my worried parents suggested arranged marriage. Initially, I refused, but considering my limited encounters with men and my parents' persistence, I attended a few matchmaking sessions. It was in one such meeting that I met Jake. Jake was kind, serious, a straightforward person, and an elite employee at a major company. Despite his imposing physique, he didn't give off an oppressive feeling. He wasn't scary at all. The matchmaking with him went smoothly, and soon we were planning our marriage and meeting his parents. Jake's family is renowned in the horse world, running their own farm. His father was a man for whom silence could be said to be beauty. I found myself straightening my posture every time we met. His mother, on the other hand, was elegant and gentle, with charming dimples when she smiled, a warm-hearted person. Before I knew it, Jake and I were set to marry. Upon marriage, becoming a full-time housewife was a condition, so I left my clerical job at the electronics company. My colleagues teased me about marrying into wealth. My parents were delighted with the marriage. Looking back, I believe that was the peak of my happiness. Jake had told me, my current job is demanding, and I might not be able to come home often, but please bear with it for a while. After achieving his goals, he wanted to support the family business. I admired his dedication to his work and decided to support him. Years into our marriage, Jake rarely comes home. I knew his returns would be infrequent, but not to this extent. Alone in our condo's living room, I wait for his return. This condo was a gift from his parents in celebration of our marriage. I wonder if he won't come home again tonight. I've only managed to serve him my cooking quite a few times. His returns are rare, and he almost never comes home at regular times after our marriage. His frequent business trips leave the house empty for days. He usually has dinner out and doesn't come home until late, despite not returning home until late at night. Jake wakes up surprisingly early and leaves the house without breakfast. I worry if he's resting properly or eating healthily. One morning, while Jake was getting ready, I decided to ask him why he doesn't eat at home. Jake, I really want you to have healthy meals, I said. But Jake didn't look at me, busy adjusting his tie. Don't worry, it's just that work is at its peak right now, he replied briefly and then swiftly left the house. He works from early morning till late at night on weekends and holidays, and he often travels for business. At first, I wondered if Jake was staying away from home to avoid me, or if there was something awkward between us. With him hardly ever being home, I feel almost as if I'm living alone. Not just his absence, but Jake owns very few personal items, only the most basic necessities, which adds to the feeling of solitude. We hardly speak, so I know next to nothing about his likes, interests, strengths, or weaknesses. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the one in the wrong. I've talked to my parents about it, but they just say, it's better for a man to be busy, and don't seem to understand my concerns. My few friends think it's ideal for a husband to earn a lot, so they don't consider my feelings deeply either. Although Jake manages all our finances, our daily needs are well provided for, and I have no financial worries. Yet, this stability only amplifies my anxiety. I can't help but blame myself, thinking I've done something to make him stay away, and feel inadequate as a wife, which makes me obsess over cleaning and improving my cooking skills. On the rare occasions we're together, Jake notices my worried expression and reassures me, Sarah, you're doing everything right. I've come to accept, somewhat reluctantly, that this might be an acceptable relationship for a marriage. Then one day, something happened. I received an unusual call from my father-in-law at the end of the year. Sarah, what on earth do you think you're doing? His angry voice boomed from the other end, causing me to almost drop the phone. What do you mean? Has something happened? I asked. Don't play dumb. Why haven't you attended the family gathering every year? I was scolded, but I had never been told about any annual family gatherings. I remember talking to Jake about Christmas greetings. He said that because father-in-law doesn't like many people coming into his house, relatives don't gather. Also, he mentioned it gets too hectic when too many family members meet, so every year, only Jake would visit his parents with Christmas gifts. You should at least apologize for not participating, his father said sternly, making me tremble. I had always stayed home during Christmas while Jake visited his parents, being careful with warm Christmas greetings and messages to maintain proper etiquette. I had suggested making a phone call, but Jake said it was too busy a time. I was afraid to face my strict father-in-law and somewhat relieved to avoid the confrontation. But according to him, all the relatives gather for a Christmas party. All I could do was apologize profusely over the phone. My father-in-law left a critical remark about my actions and ended the call. After hanging up, my mind was filled with doubts. What did Jake mean by saying, It's no problem if Sarah doesn't participate. Why did he convey the wrong information that relatives wouldn't be gathering? Could it be that he strongly wishes I do not attend the gathering? Later that night, Jake returned home. Determined not to miss this opportunity, I questioned him about the Christmas party. I received a call from your father today. He scolded me for not attending the Christmas party, I said. Jake gave a wry smile, sighed softly, and replied reluctantly, "It can be stressful to go to places where many people gather. Wives usually don't want to visit their in-laws' home, and I was just considering your feelings." I was surprised by Jake's thoughtfulness. Of course, many people dread visiting their spouse's family home, as my friends often complain about not wanting to go. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean they never attend. Despite Jake's insistence that it was alright not to participate, I felt compelled to attend this year and overruled him. His family's Christmas gathering was quite lavish. Numerous relatives were exchanging greetings and gifts. "You've finally shown up. As a member of the family, it's only natural to participate in such events," my father-in-law said coldly. Even after I told him that I had heard from Jake that there was no family gathering, his anger did not subside. "Were you avoiding us because you dislike to see everyone here?" His intense anger left me speechless, without the energy to argue. The relatives looked on from a distance, which I felt was understandable. I chose to endure patiently. However, I couldn't forgive Jake for not supporting me at all. He just continued to drink silently. As time passed and alcohol consumption increased, everyone came to me to express their grievances. "Jake said he's never seen you working around the house," they complained. Inwardly, I retorted, "That's because Jake is hardly ever home. You rarely cook, and when you do, it's not tasty, so he has to eat out." They added. Each word from the relatives was completely unfounded to me. What kind of stories was Jake telling them? It seemed he was speaking very negatively about me, but I couldn't grasp why. "I apologize. I will be more mindful from now on." I could only stiffly respond to their harsh words. Amidst piercing stares, I tried my best to assist with the cooking and serving. After getting through the Christmas party and the cleaning up the following day, I was completely exhausted and headed home. Jake went straight to work from his parents' house, and we acted separately from beginning to end. Finally home, I took a deep breath. Looking back, there were many odd situations. Why did Jake say there was no family gathering? And why is he spreading the word that I'm a wife who neglects household chores? Could it be related to his frequent absences from home? More and more concerns piled up, and I could not see an end to them. Fortuitously, with time on my hands, I resolved to check Jake's patterns of behavior, a practice commonly referred to as tail confirmation in detective series on TV. Jake set out early in the morning, and I stealthily followed behind. Knowing where Jake worked made tailing him to that point not too challenging. I felt as if I were a detective myself, a bit thrilled by the ordeal. It was more enjoyable than spending time doing nothing at home. To kill time, I lingered in cafes and restaurants near his company, and once he emerged, I began to follow him again. Jake's activities that day were nothing out of the ordinary, and he returned to his office in the evening. I continued my stakeout from a cafe with a view of his company, and around 7 p.m., Jake came out. Was he leaving work early today? If he went straight home, he would find out I'd been out. To prevent that, I needed to get home quickly. Having arrived home before Jake, I promptly prepared dinner and waited for him to return. However, Jake didn't come back until late at night. Something was definitely off. Feeling this, I decided to check on Jake's actions the following day as well. His actions from morning to evening were almost identical to the previous day. He went to work, left the office for a while, and then returned in the late afternoon. The issue was what happened after that. While I was surveilling from a different restaurant than the previous day, around 6 p.m., Jake left his office. Unlike the day before, when I rushed home, today I decided to follow him discreetly. He didn't head towards the nearest station to his company, but walked in a different direction. I hesitated but followed him. The place he was heading to was a lively area lined with hotels. Though I had finally resolved to follow him, I lost sight of him. As I searched the surroundings, Jake suddenly appeared before me. Both Jake and I were startled, staring at each other for a while. Jake was the first to speak. "Sarah, why are you here?" I was at a loss for words. "What are you doing to be in such a place at this time? What have you been doing all day?" I was surprised. It was supposed to be Jake who was under suspicion, yet I was the one being questioned. "Anyway, go home now by yourself. We'll discuss this there later." Being scolded by Jake on the spot was quite embarrassing. I hurried home. When Jake returned late at night, he immediately showered me with shocking words. "I don't know what you're doing at home, but following me around. Why should I have to support someone like that?" I pushed back a little. "I've been taking care of the household chores. Do you think you've done your share just by doing a little cleaning? From now on, you'll have to manage with just $100 for living expenses." I was speechless. How did he expect me to live on just $100? The gas and electricity bills are drawn from my account, and you haven't spent a penny on my food. Jake was smirking. "Then at least let me look for a job. I want to work part-time." Jake responded with a cold twist of his lips. Part-time is not good enough. Find a full-time job. And don't neglect the household chores. No matter how much I protested, Jake's determination was unshakable. As a result, I ended up returning to my previous job at the electronics company. My days suddenly became hectic as I had to manage both household chores and work tasks. I had no time for playing detective. My days were consumed by work and home duties. After this incident, Jake became uncharacteristically strict with me, criticizing me for every little mistake. In the brief moments we saw each other in the morning, he would complain about fingerprints on the windows, a dirty entranceway, wrinkles in his dress shirts, among other things. He would always leave for work after finding something to complain about. Since I work all day too, I could only deal with these issues at night. The days flew by as I was busy, and before I knew it, the end of the year approached along with the Christmas family gathering. Jake was as obstinate as ever, refusing to let me participate. "You should stay home. There's no need for you to attend the gathering," he said. I felt arguing was pointless and remained silent. Right before he left, Jake dropped a harsh last word. "Someone like you is too disgraceful to introduce to relatives." I was shocked by his biting words, unable to comprehend how he could say such things when I work all day and take care of everything at home. I resolved to attend the Christmas gathering without telling Jake, feeling it was necessary for his parents to see his true character. I gripped the thick envelope that had just arrived tightly in my hand. On the day of the Christmas party, as I approached his family's residence, I took a deep breath and opened the front door. Jake, immediately in sight, seemed surprised by my sudden appearance. However, concerned about the eyes around us, he glared at me but said nothing. The relatives' gazes were cold, and I could hear them quietly exchanging criticisms about me. They were only deceived by Jake. I was sure of that and remained unfazed. Despite the cold stares, I stood in the kitchen, preparing food and drinks. After a while, perhaps due to alcohol, Jake's tongue loosened, and he began to criticize me aloud. "Sarah is useless, even if she's in the kitchen. She doesn't cook properly at home," he said. At his words, the cold stares of everyone turned to me. Encouraged by this, Jake grew louder. "The meals made by the wife are terrible," he announced. Hearing this, my father-in-law's sharp gaze turned to me. "What does this mean? What are you doing? Isn't this highly inappropriate for Jake's wife?" he questioned sternly, drawing the attention of all the relatives to me. At that moment, when everyone felt the beginning of my father-in-law's lecture, I stepped forward towards Jake and began my counter-attack. "Have you ever eaten the food I made? Aren't all your meals at your lover's place?" I challenged. "What?" Taken aback, my father-in-law stood with his mouth agape. "What are you babbling about?" Amid the shock of all the relatives, only Jake began to frantically try to justify himself. "Sarah, why would you make up such a lie just because you were criticized by others?" Then Jake attempted to defend himself to his father-in-law. "Dad, I don't have a mistress." "Ah, that must be true." The father-in-law seemed to want to believe Jake, taking his word over my own. Confident that he had gained his father-in-law's trust, Jake said assuredly, "Are you out of your mind, spouting jokes like that all of a sudden?" Of course, the talk of Jake having a mistress wasn't just some joke I concocted. I pulled out an envelope from my bag and handed the documents inside to the father-in-law. Jake continued to denounce me. "Apologize right now. If you do, I'll overlook the fact that you lied." The relatives seemed convinced that Jake didn't have a mistress, and their gazes towards me remained cold as ever. The father-in-law, along with the mother-in-law, was thoroughly reading the documents I had handed over. These documents were a report on Jake's infidelity investigation. There were many suspicious points in Jake's behavior. After the unwanted conclusion of playing detective myself, I had hired a real detective agency. They found that Jake was indeed having an affair. He barely came home because he was with his mistress. He spent most of his time at her place, and even had his daily meals there. While I was scrimping on $100, juggling a full-time job and housework, Jake was having a pleasant time with his mistress. It seems I encountered Jake in the bustling district lined with hotels just as he was about to meet his mistress. I loudly confessed Jake's affair. "This is no joke. Here's the evidence." I pointed to the documents in the hands of my in-laws. Murmurs of suspicion arose from the relatives. "Jake, is this true? Explain yourself. It must be fabricated." The father and mother-in-law scrutinized the document, looking over every detail. "Hey Jake, could this possibly be true?" Jake, sweating from his forehead, vehemently denied it. "No, that can't be. I don't have a mistress." What the father and mother-in-law were now looking at with great interest were the numerous photos. "That apartment Jake is entering in the photo, it's not ours." The photos showed Jake holding hands with an unknown woman, entering an unfamiliar apartment. Next were photos of him choosing jewelry with the woman at a jewelry store, enjoying wine at a trendy restaurant, and picking out groceries at the supermarket. In all of these photos, Jake's carefree smile was plainly visible. I continued to ask Jake, "You always talked about how hard you were working overtime, Jake." Jake's complexion changed, and he was at a loss for words. I continued angrily and quickly, Why did you lie about things like not wanting to see the relatives or the food tasting bad? I didn't say it like that. Jake tries to distort the facts until the very end. I was deeply disappointed by his reaction. Everyone present fell silent during our argument, and in that moment, my mother-in-law's forceful voice rang out. Jake, what are you thinking? Even Jake was flustered by her high-pitched voice. No, you've got it wrong. Her expression was rough and fierce, a stark contrast to her usual calm demeanor. And even I felt intimidated. What's misunderstood? Are you trying to claim all of this is fake? From the previous outburst to a calm demeanor, her voice was frightening. The relatives were speechless before her overwhelming presence. All the stories I've been hearing from Sarah, they were all lies, weren't they? Now explain yourself properly. It was my first time witnessing my mother-in-law's anger. The relatives had always said she is the scariest when she gets angry. Jake began to speak in a subdued voice while kneeling. I've been involved with this woman since before our marriage. We met at a shop in New York. The relatives murmured among themselves. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law stared at Jake with stern looks. Was Jake crying? There were droplets on the floor. So, I thought I'd just marry someone suitable and live a separate life in a different house. That suitable person, you mean me? Jake bowed deeply. I'm sorry, I thought you weren't interested in marriage. So as long as I provided money, it would be okay. That's when I had a sudden doubt. Why did you speak so ill of me to your parents? I wouldn't have been so suspicious if it weren't for that. I really wanted to marry her. A life without love or affection with you wasn't what I wanted. So, I wanted to find a way to leave you. Do you realize how incredibly selfish you're being right now? Jake shrank even more. I'm truly sorry. I apologize. I was told I wouldn't be considered an adult unless I got married. So I thought I at least had to go through with the marriage. I thought once I was married, I wouldn't be nagged after a divorce. Jake seemed to have assumed that while his parents were demanding about marriage, they would not interfere with a remarriage. If he could get remarried, he could be openly with his mistress. To do so, he needed to divorce first. To make it seem like the fault was mine, he played the victim. He spread rumors about how terrible I was as a wife, discrediting me. Setting the monthly allowance to $100 was to prevent me from investigating his affair. With so little money, I wouldn't have the means to inquire further, and if I took a full-time job, I'd have less time. However, he hadn't considered that I might hire a detective. Jake's short-sighted actions have led to this moment of apology in front of the relatives. We've always said that infidelity is the one thing you should never do. How could you betray Sarah after all the efforts she has made for you? The veins on my mother-in-law's temples were bulging with anger, showing no signs of subsiding. Jake was pressing his face to the floor, making a sniffing sound as he cried, his tears and runny nose mixing together. Jake, you are a disgrace to the family. From now on, you are to sever all ties with the family, she declared. Everyone in the gathered relatives looked shocked. It was clear that the mother-in-law's will was the absolute rule of the house. The father-in-law next to her nodded quietly in agreement. There was no longer a place for Jake in this house. His infidelity had been exposed in front of the relatives, his lies came to light, and he was disowned by his own mother. He stumbled to his feet and left the room in tears. After Jake had left, my mother-in-law came to my side, took my hand firmly, and bowed her head. Sarah, I am so sorry for Jake's unforgivable behavior. Please divorce him. The father-in-law expressed his apologies too. We had fully trusted what Jake said, never imagining he could do such a thing. I deeply apologize for accusing you of unfounded guilt and shouting at you, he said. The father-in-law, usually reticent and stern, was a remarkable person who could promptly admit his mistakes and apologize. The mother-in-law, holding back tears, continued to take my hand. It was clear that this kind woman was the pillar supporting this household. How could Jake have turned out to be so self-centered and dismissive of others, despite such wonderful parents? In the end, I reconciled with my in-laws, and the divorce proceedings with Jake were soon finalized. It turned out exactly as Jake had wanted divorce. Once disowned for his infidelity by the main family, Jake lost the backing of the distinguished family name. It's uncertain if this affected his career, but he was swiftly removed from the path to promotion and seems to be working quietly as an ordinary employee. His income having drastically decreased, his mistress also left him, abruptly ending their relationship. This series of events, I heard from my mother-in-law. I got some division of assets from Jake. I even received a significantly larger sum than usual from his family. With the unexpected money, I enjoy occasional trips abroad. I continue to live in the flat provided to us as our marital home, which I was told I could use freely. I don't feel Jake's presence as he was rarely there, and I live a relaxed life. The silver lining in the midst of Jake's scandal was that I was able to return to my job. I have a sufficient income now, and it's unlikely I'll have trouble with my future livelihood. I still occasionally communicate with my in-laws and am even invited to family gatherings at Christmas, which I politely decline.